Good morning, dear colleagues. It is my pleasure to welcome you today at the Inspiration Day about participatory research live here at the Krook today. So welcome to this live audience here. I'm very happy that we can finally meet in 3D person, you know. But we also have 69 at the moment, to be precise, online participants. So some people are joining us from home. My name is Floor Verhagen and I'm the coordinator of CESMIR, the Center for the Social Study of Migration and Refugees. And CESMIR is one out of the 10 interdisciplinary consortia at the UGent. And so each of these 10 interdisciplinary consortia works on a different thematic area, but they all share the fact that they are working in interdisciplinary ways and that they are trying to generate societal impact. And this Inspiration Day on participatory research fits into an IDC Impact series, which is a series of annual events collectively organized by the 10 interdisciplinary consortia. So I welcome you today, not only in my own name, but also in the name of the 9 other coordinators of the interdisciplinary consortia. And I have some pictures for you here. So there is Stefan Meisman from the Harry Piren Institute for Medieval Studies, who is also here today. Voilà, there is Stefan. Then there is Alexis de Waele from PSYNC, working together for mental health, who is excused for today. There is Noël Klima from the Crime, Criminology and Criminal Policy Consortium. He's over there. And then there is Julie Carlier from the Ghent Center for Global Studies, who will be joining us in a while. And then there is Jeroen Bourgognon, who is excused today from Delta, Digital Innovation for People and Society. Giselle Corradi, excused today from the Human Rights Research Network. Brecht Nijt from UGent at Work. Brecht is over there. Voilà. Then there is Charlotte Prové from the Stadsacademie, a collaboratorium for sustainable issues in Ghent. Charlotte was here, she's there in the back, yeah. And then there is Sanne from GRAY, the Ghent University Research for Aging Young. Sanne is in the back over there. Voilà. Voilà, without further ado, I would now like to give the floor to Professor Dr. Ignace Lemayeux, who is Director of Research at Ghent University.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, both in your physical and virtual settings. It's my real pleasure to welcome you as a director of the research department to this day full of exciting scholarship and experiences organized by the IDC aimed at societal impacts of Ghent University. The IDC initiative is something I particularly believe in and am proud of. It's not just increasing our national and international reputation as a forward-thinking university when it comes to implementing an institutional strategy on societal impact and transdisciplinarity. But more importantly, it's also strengthening our collaborations and boosting the impact of our research, something which is, of course, primordial to our mission as a societally engaged and embedded knowledge institution. And I don't think I need to stress the importance of such a mission while we are still within the grasp of a luckily abating worldwide pandemic. Ghent University, as you have heard, currently boasts 10 IDC, ranging from medieval history over migration studies to the impacts of digital technology on mankind. And they bring together more than 500 professors, many more junior researchers, and a multitude of stakeholders and beneficiaries of research. And the remarkable thing about them is that each is coordinated by a coordinator, which is a dedicated knowledge broker who, together with the primary professors of the consortium, develops and fosters collaboration within and outside the consortium, and makes sure the pathways to impact are kept on track or shaped into new opportunities. These people are, believe me, true superheroes, tirelessly connecting the dots, keeping the creative research juices flowing, and making sure science and research is co-produced and actually makes a difference for our world. And besides this Herculean task, they are also one of the driving forces behind this new wind of change within our university, fanning the fires of impact literacy. And since their inception, the IDC have been organizing annual events through which they want to inspire others about the processes of creating impact, offering a platform for sharing knowledge and experiences, the good and the not so good. And following the first kick-off event, which took place in 2016, the footprint of social sciences and humanities, I'm happy that I can now open the fourth event in the so-called IDC Impact series. And previous topics have been impact planning, impact literacy, storytelling, policy influence, all supported by renowned guest speakers. And this year promises to be equally relevant and thought-provoking as we are shining a light on participatory research in all its many shapes and sizes. However cliché it may sound by now, we cannot ignore that our society faces a whole array of challenges, wicked problems even, each one of them more complex than the other. And to add to that cliché, we already know that solutions to or even starting to tackle these issues, our view and approach need to be broad and diverse. None of these issues will be solved by one stakeholder group through one set of brains, one expertise, using just one magic method. We need to be looking for socially robust knowledge and for co-creative ways involving people, skills and tools besides those found within academia. If we actually want to effect change in society, have an impact, we need to respectfully pull together and connect. Great impact is to be found at the end of those pathways that allow for involvement of all those who will be touched by science, those who will add their voice to the actual research question, those who will collaboratively look for the answers and add their practical insights, those who will actively or passively use this newly created knowledge, those who will be on the receiving end of new policy and new technology. Because connecting people and fostering a sustainable collaborative network are two of the main responsibilities of our IDC coordinators, and they are ideally placed to discover what processes and methods are successful in this respect. One overarching pathway to impact that has great merit is what we would collectively dub as participatory research. Within and across the consortia, researchers set about exploring this type of research method for different research topics in different disciplines, in different ways and with different stakeholders. And today we aim to connect not only those people in their experiences, but also inspire others to maybe consider participatory research methods. Professor Tineke Abma joins us for a keynote speech, which will provide us with a general backdrop to participatory research. A much needed introduction based on her own extensive experience, because participatory research may sound as the ideal pathway to impact and with great reward and fulfillment at the end, but the road is fraught with challenges and pitfalls you had better prepare for. And next, we will delve deeper into specific contexts and tips from our own researchers spanning multiple disciplines and methods. Because of the live stream, the morning program is open to a large audience, and those wanting to further hone their research skills had the opportunity to register for one of the breakout sessions this afternoon. With these sessions, we really want to showcase the boundaries of participatory research, focusing on working with and for vulnerable groups and using innovative methods that often go beyond the traditional uses of communication and language. Let me express my sincere gratitude to our esteemed keynote speaker and all our other outstanding contributors for taking the time and effort to make this a truly inspiring event. And also a special thanks to Sanne, Floor, and all other IDC coordinators for organizing this day and making it a successful event. To conclude my welcome, I would again like to reiterate that Ghent University has taken up a strong commitment to its societal responsibility, not just by way of educating and training the next generation of citizens, but also through our research strategy. We show it in the way we are changing how we assess research and researcher careers. We show it through initiatives such as the IDC and our Fund for Societal Value Creation activities. We try to offer a supportive environment for both fundamental as applied research, for interdisciplinarity, for open science, all the while respecting the brightly colored rainbow of disciplines, methods, outcomes, skills, and personalities. I really hope you have a very enjoyable and interesting day, and I am already looking forward to seeing the results of this cross-pollination in many of your projects and impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lemayeux. Next, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Tineke Abma, on stage. For over 25 years, Professor Abma has been researching themes such as patient and citizen participation in healthcare, policy and academic research, diversity and inclusion, informal care, ethics of care, vitality and resilience in inclusive elderly care. Taking the perspectives of individuals as a starting point and respecting and valuing the differences between people is her personal motivation and also a key characteristic in her research and activities. Professor Abma is Professor in Participation of Older People at the Leiden University Medical Center, Professor of Participation and Diversity at the Amsterdam University Medical Center, and Executive Director of the Leiden Academy of Vitality and Aging. Professor Abma, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's great to be here in such a lovely city. We enjoyed last night the music in the streets. So wonderful. And this is such an exciting event that Ghent University is mobilizing people to really generate impact. And I think participatory research has some things to offer. Thank you, Sanne, for inviting me, and also the other folks. We had very good conversations before even this event is happening. So I think that's a good start. Well, let's see. What's in a name? Participation is a buzzword. At least in the Netherlands, since 2015, the cabinet launched the idea of the participation society instead of a welfare state. And it all seemed so logical to have people being self-sufficient, taking care of their own support. So it just became something integrated in the discourse. Who could be against participation? So what's in a name? Yeah, it's an arbitrary concept which doesn't say something about the intrinsic qualities of what it refers to. It's an unruly concept because when you start doing participation, you will soon discover that what assumes to be taken for granted has multiple interpretations. Policymakers may think that those who are at the margins of society should participate. Researchers may think that participation is about people filling in questionnaires. And those with concerns often bring to the fore that they just want to belong, that they want to be part of a community, that they want to be acknowledged and seen. So if you have those multiple interpretations and you don't speak about what participation means, it can give all kinds of conflicts and disturbances, and you have to deal with that. And I myself, I'm always working at the crossroads of the social sciences, the humanities, and the medical sciences. And I've learned most from people with chronic diseases, people with disabilities, people who are old or live in poverty or are unemployed, because they appeal to the responsibility you have as a researcher the moment you have such high normative ideals about social inclusion, about respect, about democratic decision-making. And when you are starting to do that in practice, you will run into all kinds of obstacles, situations where people appeal to your moral responsibility. And I really like the quote from Donald Schoen. He wrote a book, I think it was in 1987, about a reflexive practitioner. And he says that every professional practice has a high ground. And in the high ground, technical solutions, textbooks are perfectly well to deal with situations. But every professional practice has also what he calls a swampy lowland. And in the swampy lowland, there are ambiguities, there are difficulties, there are situations you rather like to avoid, but in those situations you learn the most. And he also says, in the swampy lowland, there are things happening which are most important for human beings. So we should not avoid those places, but be within those places. And I will, at the end of my talk, come back to this quote of Donald Schoen by telling you a story about the ethical challenges when doing this work. But let me start by making the case for participation. Why is it relevant? This is Melanie. Melanie has a spinal cord injury. She sits in a wheelchair due to an accident at very young age. And you can imagine that this meant a loss for her, a loss of her career, a loss of physical activity, of friends, of leisure activities, of self-confidence and self-esteem, and also a loss in terms of a life and a world getting smaller. So this is just one story about a woman who I worked with and that has made an impression on me. And about 20 years ago, the Dutch Council for Scientific Research asked me to develop a methodology for health research agenda setting from the perspective of patients. And I decided to work with one group of patients, those with spinal cord injuries. And I didn't know the disease, so I contacted the patient organization and I asked them, is there someone who can team up with me, because I don't know what it means to have a spinal cord injury. And there I met Elisa, and we became a team that began to interview people, and we did focus groups. And initially we asked them, what are important research themes for you as a group? And most people stayed numb and said, well, that's something for experts. But they really like to talk about their own stories and about their own experiences. So we opened up and left the idea of coming up with a list of themes. And soon there was a group of people who wanted to join us, so we became a group of researchers. And what was very striking that in those stories, they had a lot of issues related to health, for example, bladder problems or decubitus or overweight. But there were also social and psychological issues, like they were telling me, you don't have such a disease on your own. It's also something that affects your partner relation, your family. There were issues in the communication with medical professionals, issues around bureaucracy when needing a wheelchair, and a lot of issues related to society, like belittling conversations, people looking down on them. So they had all kinds of issues. And we also talked to the researchers. Now, do you have a clue what the researchers were doing? Anyone? Yeah?
You're probably talking to the doctors and the healthcare professionals.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? What were the researchers? What were their themes?
I guess something very medical.
Very medical? Well, very narrow, very narrow, and very super specialized, because they were all focused on mobility. So how could people in wheelchairs be more efficient? That was their prime focus. So we had there this huge amount of issues from the perspective of patients, and we had this tiny, very narrow, focused topic studied by the researchers, a topic which had low priority for the patients. And this has made such an impression on me, because there's such a discrepancy and a big gap between what people find important and what researchers are doing. And I think it's a perfect example of what we now call research waste. It looks as if the researchers were putting their hands on their ears, not wanting to know what was important for patients. But at the moment, citizens are knocking on our doors, knocking on the doors of the university. We have knowledge, we are highly educated, we have access to the internet, we have expectations. We do not automatically agree with the expertise of professors that always stood on a pedestal. We want to co-produce knowledge with you. And some of the citizens are even angry. They put on yellow jackets and they say, our voice has been neglected or has been disqualified or hasn't been heard, while our issues are also important. So there are a couple of arguments why participation is important. First of all, ethical. If we find inclusion and equality and democratic decision-making important, we need other approaches in research. There are political reasons. If we want to make room for voices of other people, we should not disqualify them. Humanistic considerations. If we engage people in the research process. It will help them to gain more control over their lives. But also methodological. If we systematically ignore certain voices or certain perspectives, this will lead to a partial view of the world. And practical also. If people are not included in the production of knowledge, they will not feel co-owners of the knowledge and they will not implement or use it. So this is why participation is important. There are lots of reasons, and I never forget the story about the people whom I worked with, and the discrepancy that can exist. So there's really a need to increase the value of research. So the next question is, how can we do that? And luckily enough, we have a rich tradition and history of participatory research, partly influenced by developments in the Global South. You see here Paulo Freire, an educator and philosopher from Colombia, who worked with farmers and peasants and soon discovered that those people were not very interested in knowledge and expertise he was delivering to them, as if they were sort of banks where you could put your information in. But they were eager to work with him if he started to be interested in their life world, in the issues they were dealing with. So he developed a methodology wherein conscientization, a growing awareness, is very important. There's another pillar which is very important for this tradition, and that is focused on action. And here the name of Kurt Lewin is important. He was a Jew who fled from Berlin to America in the 30s, and he was interested in labor workers in factories and how these labor workers were often very critical of all kinds of managerial instructions, but were not allowed to use that knowledge to improve their practice. And Kurt Lewin started to work with them how their knowledge could help to create a more humanistic work floor and workspace. And Kurt Lewin was also influenced by Dewey, a philosopher in America, who said that knowledge can be derived from action. So in action, you can learn, you can reflect, and especially taking into account uncertainty, this is very important. For Dewey, he said that if we live in a world with a lot of uncertainties, we should not plan everything ahead, but we should rather do little steps, little actions, and reflect on them and learn from them. So those are the two pillars of participatory action research. Freire, who is very explicit about the participation and empowerment, and Lewin, who has thought about the importance of action. The goals of participatory action research are targeted at the enhancement of the personal understanding of those whose issues are at stake, as well as the mutual understanding among stakeholders, among people with diverse perspectives. So this is very different from the traditional, conventional research, where the goal is that the researcher is gaining more knowledge. Here it's about people developing and mobilizing knowledge. I like the word mobilizing because it's not something, I mean, in a traditional knowledge conceptualization, we have the academy where knowledge is produced and then it's transferred to practice. And the word of knowledge mobilization indicates that we should mobilize the knowledges which are already there in practice and synthesize that knowledge. So people themselves should be engaged in a process of inquiry in order to understand their world better. And that process also leads to empowerment, to more control over your situation, and to capacity building, which can lead to collective action, which can lead to local change. So change is planned between brackets, because we all know that change is not a linear process, but it's not a byproduct. It's generating impact, generating change is a goal of participatory research. And this is given in or informed by a moral or normative horizon of social inclusion and social justice. And for a moment, I would like to ask you to take a minute and talk to your neighbor about what are the most important differences between this type of research and conventional research. So take a few minutes to discuss with your neighbor what you think are the most important differences. Okay. It's nice to see you all deliberating. What are the most important differences? Who wants to share some of your thoughts? Yeah?
I think there's some kind of modesty in your role as an academic that is not inherent in the conventional way of doing research, where you're regarded as an expert.
Sorry. Can you, yeah. Can you repeat what you said?
We were discussing that there's some kind of modesty in the participatory approach that is not self-evident in the conventional way of doing research. Modesty to yourself as an academic, so to say.
Thank you. So the researcher has another role. Somebody else? Yeah. Go ahead.
We were discussing that it also changes your research process, your flow, where you normally start with reading literature and creating a research question. Now you start with going to your talking to your participants and letting the research question more rise up from the demands they have.
Thank you. Yeah. So you start getting engaged in the context with talking with people. Yeah, yeah. Instead of a systematic review. Somebody else? Yeah.
Yeah, we were also discussing that conventional research often pretends to stay away from values or opinions on what a good society is or should look like. And here in participatory action research, you really start from the importance of democracy, equality, human rights, and so on.
Yeah, yeah. You're not value neutral, but you have a value commitment. Yeah, that's right. Bastiaan?
It's more or less related. We were discussing the changing nature of knowledge production. That in a traditional research plan, we have a very strict protocol to produce valid knowledge with high internal validity, external validity, objectivity, all these things.
Yeah.
And in participatory action research, things become more messy, become more contextualized. And we were discussing what it means for our evolution as an academic discipline.
Yeah, yeah. So the design is much more emergent. That's correct. And yes, it will have implications for disciplines. And it's cool that the University of Ghent is already thinking in terms of problems instead of disciplines. Well, this is an overview of the main differences. While in conventional research, you are focused on description and explanation of the reality in order to control reality. Within participatory research, you are focused on change and societal impact and empowerment. Conventional research is for practice or about practice. So the researcher is standing out of the practice as if it's something that can be objectified, while in participatory research you are embedded within practice and mobilizing the knowledge within that practice. So it's in collaboration with practice. In conventional research, you can have the contribution of end users, but within the design already developed by the researchers. In participatory action research, you have the co-creation of knowledge. So different forms of knowledge come together, not only expert knowledge, but also professional knowledge, experiential knowledge, artistic knowledge come together. And the expert is no longer in control. Control and power is shared with the stakeholders. So there is a co-production and a co-creation of knowledge, which goes further than just the involvement of end users in research. And I think that's a very important thing to recognize. That think of the example of the people with spinal cord injury. The researchers could have said, we are studying mobility and help us to study mobility. That's involvement. The topic is chosen by the researchers or chosen by the funding agency. That is involvement, and that's fine. But in participatory research, you start from the topics and the issues which are important for people themselves. So things that affect themselves become the topic of your research. And it's always a bit, well, it's not messy, but it's, you become modest. One of my first studies in the nursing homes, I came there and they told me the most important theme here is the meals. We want to improve the meals. The menu is not right, the ambience is not right. And I felt a bit, well, it took me some time to accept that that was their main issue, because it was so small, not very abstract or highbrow or very plain, but very important for them. So you feel already the modesty that you need, and also the need to not bring to the fore your own issues because you find them more important. So that's, I think, the most important step for active and meaningful participation, that you start where people are and what is important for them. And then there is the, then there is the sharing of power and control in the whole process, formulating the research question, talking about what are the right methods, how are we going to disseminate this knowledge. So in all phases of the research process, people are involved. And how they are exactly involved, you do not know beforehand. You have to negotiate and talk with people to discover where their talents lie, what they want to contribute, what is a good and safe environment for them to be included. And it may also develop over time. People may start thinking that they can only join an interview, but that do not the interview themselves. And after a while, they have seen how the researcher is doing that, and they say, hey, I can do that. I've seen people with intellectual disabilities doing that. So there's change and transformational learning, and this can be very tangible. Think of the ladies who I did the study with in the nursing home. They called themselves the taste buddies. And they succeeded in reopening the kitchen. That's a very tangible change, very important in their lives. But there were also intangible aspects we should not forget, because they started to develop more horizontal relationship within the nursing home. The director of the nursing home was very inspired by what we did, and so he installed what he called a captain's dinner. Every Friday, he had lunch with the people in a nursing home where they could just tell him what they were worried about. So there was a democratization within the nursing home, which is not very tangible, but very important. And also, people began to reimagine who they were. Initially, they were very shy and silent and didn't want to bring up the issues they were bothered by. But after a while, they became more assertive and they became more confident. And they began to see themselves as, we know something, we may speak up. So those are also very important aspects of change and transformational learning. I've talked about the importance of doing. So by actually taking action, you will learn what is possible. For example, in the nursing home, initially the residents said, "Oh no, nothing will change. We have been complaining all the time and the client council doesn't listen to us and the manager doesn't listen to us." And when we started to do little small actions, they began to see, well, yes, they are listening to us. We can change something. So doing and learning is an important aspect. And you always have ripple effects. You always have effects over longer time which you cannot predict. The roles of the researcher, yes. You're not an expert standing above the practice, but you join the tribe. You're part of the practice. And so this is also a very relational way of doing research because you have to relate and collaborate with people. You're not standing somewhere high above practice or something. And your participants become partners. They become co-researchers who have their own ideas. Well, this is a picture that was drawn by people who I asked, what does a good participatory researcher look like? Big ears. And what else do you see? I like the mouth that is, so you have to sometimes shut up. And the feelers are also very interesting, I think. You have to have a certain sensitivity. So you see, you have different roles. You are a facilitator, you are a teacher, sometimes you are a mediator. These are the roles that a good participatory researcher need to develop. And you also have things that are related to attitude, so empathy, creativity, flexibility, a tolerance for ambiguity. And on the bottom you see the tasks which you have as a participatory researcher, giving support to the stakeholders, stimulating collaboration and communication. So those are tasks you not necessarily associate with being a researcher. So this also requires something of your personal and interrelational skills as a researcher. You have to like to work with people. And this is challenging the vertical epistemology of our positivistic ways of doing research, where the expert is standing above practice, where objectivity and rationality are very important, and where you are opening up for new forms of knowledge in a horizontal way. So the expert knowledge is not standing above other ways of knowledge, but you have to see knowledge much more in a horizontal way. And one of the key issues here is that you should not think that participatory research is about using the right methods, but it's much more about creating a communicative space. And Habermas has written beautiful things about this. He said in our modern societies, we are too much focused on strategic communication, and we need more room for communicative action. So this is very important, creating a safe space where people can, in dialogue, search for new meanings and develop also new kinds of thought. I want to continue with a case example to show you what this looks like in practice. This is a project I did in Rotterdam. It's called CLIck, and CLIck stands for the click with the camera and the click with yourself. It's a project in deprived neighborhood with children. So one of the issues I started with was, how can we prevent tokenism or pseudo-participation? Because it's very easy in such a case that you ask adult representatives instead of working with the children. How can I engage children? What kind of methods do I need? I hadn't worked with children before, so this was really something that was I was curious about, especially because of the power asymmetries between adults and children. These were the consortium members from all over the city. And here you can see the neighborhood. In this neighborhood, 1 of 4 children grows up in poverty. And that's why we thought it's important in this neighborhood to work with children, to raise their awareness for health and well-being. We worked in 2 primary two primary schools for a period of 4 years, which was really cool, with children aged from 8 to 11, in total 75 children. And there was a sponsor that was Fonds Nuts Ora. And this funding agency or charity organization played an important role. On the one hand, they were very interested in participatory research because they knew that a lot of health interventions do not reach the groups that need them the most. But on the other hand, they were also very eager to have outcome measures, which was contradictory with the open process of participatory research. So they had already set the topic health, and they had already defined indicators like reducing overweight, and we had to work with that. We put it on the agenda in one of the first meetings with the funding agency, but they did not want to let go their indicators. So we needed to do something with overweight, which was a challenge. Here you can see something of the neighborhood, the population, a lot of people from non-Western background, low education level, low income groups, health condition not very good. The parents were very tolerant for smoking in homes. There was a lot of overweight. And our challenge was, how can we engage the children in the research? How can they become co-researchers? And I did this project with a friend of mine. We both live in this neighborhood, and she's a professional photographer. So we wanted to use all kinds of creative methods to engage the children. And one of the things that was very important was using photo voice. So we gave cameras to the children, where they really became agents. They were the ones who were making pictures instead of being pictured. And we also chose to use white coats as a symbol that they became the researcher. And it was fascinating to see that when they put on this coat, they were growing. And we didn't know how to fill in these 4 years. The only thing we knew was it's going to be about health and health-related themes, something about food, something about exercise, but what exactly, we don't know. And in retrospect, we can see in year 2, we worked on food, because that was something the parents and the children were really interested in. And we had all kinds of labs, like tasting food that we had colored. In year 3, we did a lot of work on sport and exercise, because we discovered that when we asked children in year 2 how they associated health, they were only talking about vegetables and drinks, etc., but not about exercise. So that was the reason we chose to work on sports and exercise in year 3. And in year 4, we wanted to bring all things together in a more broader concept of well-being. Now, this is the participatory actions we took over the years. We started with giving them cameras and asking them to make photographs of their neighborhood. What did they see? Fascinating to see. We had hundreds of pictures, and I never realized there were lots of pictures about cars, animals, all kinds of funny pictures. There was the Bethelkerk, and then they photographed Hellkerk. Very funny, very creative. This is not a very, this is, I said it's a deprived neighborhood, but they also saw beautiful things. They were not only focused on the things that were not good, they also saw good things. And when we asked the children what they appreciated most, the museum corpus, which is a museum that is designed as a corpus, as a body, was top one. And you can imagine why that is, because those children never leave the neighborhood. So going in a bus to a museum in another town was a big event. They had never experienced such a thing. And that was also what the parents told us. We cannot do these things for the children. We are surviving. But what you have given these children is so valuable for us. So this is the food lab. We did wild pluck walks in the neighborhood. We made smoothies. In year 3, we did a sport lab where children had to measure their heart rate and how much they were sweating, and taking into account their muscles. And we did capoeira to also do movement on music. And in the last year, we designed a plants lab. We gave the children, each children, we gave a plant, and they had to cut the plant in 2. And one part of the plant should be taken care of in order to grow, metaphorically, and the other plant should be neglected. And this was a way to trigger them thinking about, what do I need? So some children said, my plant needs attention. Yeah. Hilarious. Also because they never did such things at their homes, and they were very nervous about all the mess. And this was throughout the project. So we had a group of children who were actively engaged, those 75 children. They made newspapers about their activities in order to have the newsletter spread in the school to the parents. So you see here them watching and looking through the newspapers. And we also organized events where children were informing other children about what they had learned. For example, how much sugar you have in Coca-Cola, or all kinds of experiments they did. And they told all the children from peer to peer what they had learned. And we also shared their pictures in exhibitions with the partners within the local community to enter into a dialogue about, for example, the food given to the children, or about the space within the neighborhood. What did they learn? Well, they learned a lot about their body, about sports and exercise, about food and drinks, but also about photography and about nature. So this was luckily much broader than only the little topic of the funding agency. And there were also things they thought were very weird. One of the teachers noticed that children were sitting on the toilet for a long time. So she was assuming that the children had problems because they were not eating enough fiber. So we did something with poop, where we took gingerbread and peanut butter. Well, that was weird. But also kind of, nice. And it was also mindfulness was also something very, very strange for these children. The classrooms were always very noisy, very chaotic. And can you imagine that we brought in a mindfulness teacher with a bowl, and that they had to close their eyes and sit still? And it worked. And children found it hard to admit that it helped them to become more relaxed, and that they also could practice that at home. So it was weird, but it was also interesting and valuable for them. Would they recommend it to others? Yeah, a click was awesome. One of the boys said, ik leerde er zoveel van. En ik vergeet het nooit meer. I will never forget this. So this is what PAR looks like in practice. But I also want to tell you the other side. In the book we wrote with a couple of international scholars, we have this lab with colors which are symbolizing the various threads of knowledge. But in the back, you have all these nuts. So this is the back side I'm going to tell you. And this is a story Barbara, she's sitting here in front, was involved too. And her PhD is actually on the ethics of participatory action research. This is Aniek and Mia. And they have been our partners in a project on the crisis care for people with mental health problems in the city of Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, we have a so-called psycholand. I don't know whether you have this here, but This is a sort of ambulance for people who are getting a mental crisis and then are brought to a hospital. And this was seen as an important and innovative improvement in the city. But when one of the directors of the client advocacy organization asked, "Have you asked users?" Silence. They had asked the psychiatrists and the nurses whether this was an improvement, but not the users. And they felt they should do that. So we were asked to do an evaluation of the psycholens and the crisis care from the perspective of users. So what we first started to do was getting into contact with users. So we found Mia and Aniek. Aniek had had many psychoses in her during her life. She had been admitted against her will in mental institutions. So she was very eager to work with us. And Mia had suffered from depression. And besides these two ladies, we had two academics and also two academics who had also experiential knowledge. So they had double identities. And what happened was that we started to work building up a team, and it all went very well. But halfway the project, we had to come up with a report, and there was a deadline, and there were the CEOs from the mental health institutions who wanted to have a report. And then something happened. A concern was brought to the fore by one of them. I see that a few sentences are written by someone who could not empathize with the position of the server user. I feel dispossessed. This is not the conclusion I would draw by this research. Who owns the final version? Who decides? Who has the power to decide the content of this most read and most important part of the report? Okay. So this was brought to the fore by one of them with a lot of urgency and almost also indicating, I will leave this team if you do not do something with this issue, because I expected to be heard, I expected to be given room to express my voice, and that's not the case. And this was true because of the deadline, we were taking over. The academics were taken over. They were writing the report. What would you do in such a situation? Someone?
Ask for postponing of the deadline and work on this seriously.
Yeah, ask for postponing the deadline. Yeah. And also talking with her about her frustrations, because this was not something that, it was not only postponing the deadline, she also wanted to really talk with us about the issue of power. And there was another concern. I could not make it clear. My arguments were not understood, and I could not write them down like the others. This was a person who had dyslexia. Others gained more influence by paper. Parts of my knowledge have been lost because I speak and do not write accurately. So some users are, but not all are heard or understood. So this was a comparable issue where, because we are so verbal, we are so focused on writing things, we hadn't even thought about a person who, with the dyslexia, could not bring in what was important for her. So again, we had this discussion within the team. But there was also this bigger context where we came up with our report, and this was not all nice. This was not all hooray about the psycholens. No, there were lots of issues brought by the fore to about restrictions of freedom, about not making contact. So these were critical issues. And some people were very easy by, very articulated by saying this is a very subjective report. So this is not methodologically sound. This is just, you know, some users who are saying this, but you know they have their psychological state, so they are not reliable, and they're highly emotional. So this kind of knowledge, we need to take that serious. We don't need to take that very seriously. So here was another issue coming to us. We who had always said we are there for the voice of the service users, and now we had to stand up and say, hey, this is not just subjective and emotional, this is a valid source of knowledge. So there was silencing of knowledge throughout the process, initially by not taking the voices into account and focusing on the evaluation of psychiatrists and nurses. But later on in the process, the voices got lost again because of constraints, academic routines, written language, and also because the user's knowledge was contested. And also the pictures that I showed you. This is a collage made by the patients. This is a photo they were putting into the report, and that had to be removed. And this was a drawing about what it felt like to be secluded. So these pictures made by patients, because not everything can be said in word, which is so important in their lives and so traumatic, they had to be removed from the report. So there were lots of ethical issues that came to us and generated questions. What is our responsibility in this? We can postpone a deadline, but what do we do with a commissioner who says, these pictures cannot be in the report? We are shaping the space for user involvement. So we are complicit, we are part of that. And again and again, the question is, who do we include, who do we exclude, and what is actually good participation? And we were not neutral outsiders. We had to take a position in this issue. Otherwise, we would end up with what Miranda Fricker calls epistemic injustice. In all such injustices, the subject is wronged in her capacity as a knower. To be wronged in one's capacity as a knower is to be wronged in a capacity essential to human value. And I really love this quote because it resonates so much with the anger and the frustration of our co-researchers, who were again put aside. So we have a commitment to epistemic justice, and this means that we have to do something with the issues coming to us. So participatory research also requires ethics work. And I like the term ethics work because this is work. This is an effort. This is not just going to the review board, having your proposal approved, and then just do the research. These are everyday ethical issues which come up all the time and which are intense and complicated and not easy. This is the swampy lowland. This is the swampy lowland. And ethics work is something you learn in practice by doing it, by addressing the questions that are difficult. So to conclude, there's an urgency for citizen and end user participation. There's a solid theory and tradition we can build upon. We can increase the value of research. We can increase societal impact and the capacities of people. But we also have to learn and develop ourselves. We have to professionalize this kind of research in order to be taken serious within the broader society, but also to be better researchers, to deal with these ethical issues relating to collaboration, power and responsibilities. And these issues are messy, cannot easily be tamed. And this is not just a technical enterprise. This is a very moral and relational enterprise, which include ethics work. And I have a few recommendations who are not. My recommendation is that it's important to have groups of people who you can talk with about those issues. Safe spaces where you can dive into those moral dilemmas instead of brushing them under the carpet. And there are international collaborations you can join, but I think within the University of Ghent you have a unique platform to organize dilemma cafes, to really be each other critical friends in these issues. So that would be my recommendation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
I don't know, Charlotte, you were hinting to me about the time. 5 minutes. 5 minutes? Have we some time to? Yeah. 15 minutes for answers or questions, yeah?
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. It was really inspiring, especially because you have so much experience with different kind of stakeholders. So this was really interesting. I do have a question, though, about do you consider funding agencies as stakeholders?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, ideally, I would say they are stakeholders in this process. Usually they like to see themselves as standing outside these processes, just giving money to the people who do the research work. But this has implications for funding agencies. If we want to do participatory research, one of the problems is, for example, that funding agencies require us to write proposals without having time to build collaboration with people in the neighborhood. So there's one funding agency in the Netherlands which is now experimenting with giving researchers the time, 1 month to a year, to first build a collaboration within a community so that they can write a proposal together. but this requires something from the funding agency that they give trust to the researchers and the community that they will work on something that will also, if it's of good quality, will receive money to be implemented. So funding agencies are very important in this. Very important. Yeah.
I have another question as well, because of the diversity of your projects, I can imagine that you also work with a diversity in background. So my question is, how do you make up your team? Because I can imagine that you have different kinds of people working for you.
Yeah. We always try to find people who have experience in the topic we are researching. So if we are researching something with people with intellectual disabilities, we will need to work with them. Or people who are unemployed, we build up relationships with people who are unemployed. But we also have sense that for people who are going to be part of those projects, they find it very valuable and they want to stay engaged. They do not want to stop when the project stops. So we have also built a community with co-researchers who like to work with us over time, over different projects, and who also can share their learning experiences with each other. Perhaps Barbara, you would like to add something about that? The mic? She would like to add something. Yeah.
Yeah, we had some co-researchers who were very involved in projects and were very sad when it stopped. So after a while, we said we have to do something with this issue because it's an ethical issue, and I also feel responsible for the relation you build and the topics they think they're important. So now we have a community of practice with co-researchers, and we try, but it's a very difficult point to organize research on the topics they have on their agenda. So they are the starting point of new projects. But then you need the funders and all the other stakeholders, because they are often very complex projects and topics who nobody thinks somebody is the owner. There are lots of owners of that problem. So it are the complex, wicked problems.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your very enriching presentation, Tineke. I have also a question which touches upon this ethical dimensions and perhaps a bit more in institutional way. As a researcher, we all have to write data management plans, request ethical clearances from ethical committees, write consent forms, information letters. You know this.
Yeah.
And of course, the main reason is that we want to protect the participants. But I have also noticed how much this frightens actually the participants, especially vulnerable people, for instance, people without papers to sign these documents and so on. It's a bit tricky. So I just wanted to ask what your opinion is about this, on the one hand, process of protecting participants, but also hindering, in a way, their participation. Perhaps it's also a bit the same in the whole idea of anonymizing the participants, because they have their personalities. If we see them as experts, it does really matter who they are. And then we suddenly do not include that anymore in the report.
Yeah, yeah. Very recognizable So the standard principle ethics and I would almost say sort of managerial way of doing ethics is something you have to deal with. And what we have tried to do is to also set up a dialogue with the medical ethical committees in order to give them more information about what participatory research is all about, because they are so much focused on protection, while in participatory research it's about agency and engaging people and giving them credit for who they are, and oftentimes they want to be recognized as persons, and so entering into a dialogue with the scientific committee and with the medical ethical committee is very important to give them more information, because many of them are unfamiliar with this kind of work and are unfamiliar with the ethical principles that are important in this kind of work. And especially Sarah Banks has done a lot in writing about the ethical principles of participatory research. And it also helps to present those principles to the committee so that they understand this is not only about privacy or confidentiality, but this is also about sharing power, about collaboration, about democratic decision-making, other kinds of ethical issues. And of course, we also have to deal with privacy and consent. And I agree that can be very frightening. In the CLIck project, that was absolutely the case. If we had just given the parents the informed consent, they would never have signed this. So what we did is that we started to talk with them about what do you think of your child being pictured? Can we use that picture or not? And also talking to the children about how they felt about dealing with all the images we were generating. And this even became more urgent because in year one, a couple of journalists discovered the pictures made by the children, pictures from food, and they took the pictures and wrote a news article about it without the consent of the children. So this was a really this was, especially because we were in the beginning of the project, this could have been led to stopping the project. So we said to the journalists, we are not going to work with you anymore. And this was why we started our own newsletter. This was a response to the newsletter made by the journalists. We said, we are going to make our own newsletter. This is our data. This is our information. This is not something that can be owned by you. This is owned by the people themselves. So different topics, and it takes it. Yeah. So it's a process, and it's beautiful to see that this negotiation processes with the children and the parents also helps them in terms of capacity building, because the children are very knowledgeable right now about which picture do I like to share, which picture do I not like to share, why not? For example, capoeira, big issue in this neighborhood. Some children thought it was far too sexy, could not be released. Other children were very happy and enthusiastic. So this in itself was already a form of capacity building.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about the CLICK project, because you mentioned that the funding agency wanted to reduce overweight.
Yeah.
How did you evaluate the impact? Because I can imagine that they also want to see like tangible results and
Yeah.
impact on BMI. So I wondered how you dealt with that.
Yeah, we although we try to discuss this indicator, we couldn't get the money. We really had to do that. So we asked another research institute focused on sport and exercise to do this impact evaluation on overweight by using data, because we didn't want to measure the children. That was something we were really against. But there was information that was already gathered by the municipality about the weight of the children. So they have used this information in combination with how the children self felt, with emoticons, to give us an insight in the BMI. And it was interesting to see that this was very different for the two schools. The school that had already done some work on sports and exercise, there we saw less effect than in the school which didn't have any program at all when we started. So we could see a difference between the school, but this was, of course, not a controlled study or anything. And I always have told them, we need stats and we need stories. So I have always given them the stats, but also the stories. And in the end, they do more with the stories and with the photos than with the stats. But they were really uncertain about this. How do we do... So this links to accountability. Funding agencies have to rethink accountability if they are doing these kinds of projects. Because I would say that impact is something that needs to be defined by the stakeholders in practice. They are the ones who determine impact, not the funding agency. That's not participatory.
Thanks a lot for this inspiring talk. I just have a question on when participants become co-researchers. This also raises questions on where the funding goes. Because, of course, as an academic researcher, you're usually paid for this. We have all these systems of, you have to produce a PhD, etc., and this is what you can get funding for. So I'm just very curious. This is always a difficult issue when you try to do this kind of research. I'm just curious to hear from you how you have dealt with this in different projects.
Very good point. Something immediately raised by those women with mental health care problems who live in poverty and who say, hey, you value my experiential expertise. Can you also pay for that? Yeah, that's I think, something you need to do. And then, of course, you can discuss how much you have to pay them. And then it often interferes with what they receive, for example, from the municipality already. But this is an issue that needs to be resolved. You have to talk about this, because otherwise, during the project, this will come up. And it really depends. Some people find it very important to be part of a team, to have nice meetings where they are really welcomed and given flowers, or so it depends on the groups you're talking. But the basic point is, you need to have resources to to honor the input of these people. And I've talked with funding agencies over many, many years, and they do not want to institutionalize this. So you have to work around this yourself. Perhaps, Barbara, you want to say something about that? No? Yeah. Yeah. About the women in poverty? Yeah. The mic? Yeah.
It's always the question: do you want to become involved in a job as a person with experiential knowledge? And also, well, after 4 years, I worked with a group of women in poverty. Now one person is having a job at a funding agency. I worked with a funding agency. But then she said, well, I get the salary that is even, well, almost lower than my payment from the government. Yeah, because I don't have the papers for a higher scale to be paid.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. It's about time to wrap up.
Yeah.
Thank you a lot, Tineke, and also Barbara for the additions. We will have a very short break now, but by the time we have the break, or in the break, I would like to think about these 3 questions. You can go to and vote for yes or no. Simple. Two possible answers, yes or no. So you can either go to menti.com and use this code, or scan the QR code. It should even work when you're in the audience. I see some people trying already. So voila, these are the questions, and we'll see you back here at 11 already.
Voilà. En dan moet
Ja, doe maar. Ja. Doe maar, hè.
Voilà. En zo zou dat goed moeten zitten. Ietsje. Voilà.
Oké.
Goed?
Ja.
En misschien toch nog ietsje dichter plooien.
Zo? Zo.
Nee, niet zo hard, dus als je het niet voelt. Maar ik denk dat je dat een beetje verder doet. Dus dat dan inderdaad. Straks hier een lichtje op inzetten. Voilà. En dan ga ik als laatste aan u ook inzetten. Je mag je rond je rechteroor doen.
Zo?
Dichter.
Hoe bedoel je?
Het stukje kan nu ook plooien dat hij iets vaster rond je oor zit. Het microfoontje ietsje dichter tegen je hoofd. Voilà, dat zou goed moeten zijn. En dan straks als je praat, gewoon hier aan dat lichtje. En dan zet je op als je wat aan de... Ja, voilà. Of ik kan het nu al aanzetten, maar dan gaat die geluid ook wel.
Wat we dan niet.
Is het oké?
All right. I think slowly but steadily we can start again. Welcome back. As you have seen, some colleagues from Ghent University and the Ghent University Hospital have joined Professor Dr. Abma on stage. They will share their experience with participatory research in a diversity of research domains and a variety of specific contexts. The panel will be moderated by Professor Dr. Luus Beekmans. And Luus Beekmans is an assistant professor in architecture and urbanism related to migration and diversity, and a senior postdoctoral research fellow funded by the Flanders Research Foundation. In her current research, she works on the intersection of migration, city and architecture, with a prime focus on migrants and refugees, housing and homemaking. She coordinated a number of participatory, let's just check, yes. She coordinated a number of participatory action researchers, for example, for Open Arts House Globa Roma, and for Vluchtelingenwerk Vlaanderen, Refugee Action, the Flemish Refugee Action. She also co-curated several exhibitions together with Heim and the Stadsacademie and Sesmir. And Professor Beekmans is supervising several research projects, and within the Horizon 2020 project Reroute, she is the work package leader on mapping and action research. She has several engagements outside of academia, for instance, as the president of the board of Collectief Goed in Antwerp, and as a member of the board of Campus Atelier in Ghent. And within Ghent University, she is a member of 3 interdisciplinary consortia, the Stadsacademie, Sesmir, and the Ghent Center for Global Studies. She is also the co-president of the Ghent Africa platform. Professor Beekmans, I leave the stage to you.
Thank you so much, Flor, for this very nice introduction. But I think it's now my turn to introduce the 4 panelists of today. So on my left, this is Wendy van der Velde. She's coordinator of the Patient Advisory Board for Scientific Research at the Health Innovation and Research Institute of UZ Ghent, which is the hospital linked to Ghent University. She's the liaison between the members of PAWO, so that's the acronym of the institute, the researchers and the funding organizations for research. Welcome.
Thank you.
And next to Wendy, we have Bastiaan Bakarne. He's a senior researcher at the research group IMEC-MICT UGent, which is a very long acronym, but I took a look at the website, and MICT stands for Research Group for Media, Innovation and Communication Technologies, which is already explaining a bit more what you're doing. And he is studying co-creative innovation, ecosystems, hackable cities, and participation inequalities in urban innovation. And I'm sure you will explain in a moment what this is all about. Welcome, Bas. And then next to Bas, we have Tessa Buykens. And Tessa Buykens recently obtained her PhD in history. Congratulations, by the way. And she co-founded the International Participatory Video Festival. And she's currently working for Confluence, accompanying co-creative research projects in the Brussels region. Welcome. And then, unfortunately, we need to apologize Griet Roets from the Social Work Department at Ghent University, as she fell ill yesterday. And we wish her, of course, a smooth recovery, and I'm sure, and I hope we will find other opportunities to learn more about her work. And then we also have, of course, Tineke with us. I don't need to reintroduce her, but welcome to the panel. So our panel conversation will be organized along 3 sections. I don't have I have it here. And these sections are actually based on the Memimeter questions you've got before the break. And hopefully you did all, or some of you did at least your homework. So this is the first question. Does participatory research lead to more societal and to more scientific innovations, which are actually 2 different things? But let's look at the vote. So I have to turn. So it's only a small number of people who are voting no, 3%. Or 3 votes. I don't know how it's working, actually. I will say 3 votes. Yes? It's like the Eurosong context that I'm now presenting suddenly. And then we have 50 votes that say yes. So there is a kind of unanimity over there. Perhaps I will look to the audience who has actually said yes and would like to share some thoughts about this. Is there anyone who would like to do that? Why you think yes, it leads to more societal impact or scientific innovation? No one? Okay, yeah, I see someone over there. The mic is coming to you, a mobile mic. Is it working?
I think especially the societal impact, because you make it more relevant to the end users, and as a way of making the end user participate to the research, you will also lower the threshold for implementation. And I think that's a very crucial factor that we often overlook.
Yes, yes, of course, in terms of impact, that will make a difference. Thank you. And perhaps someone on the scientific innovation part? Yes, over there.
Well, for me, it's because then you bring together different forms of knowledge, and then you get this really a hybrid setting where you, in my opinion, you get much more opportunities for scientific innovations and social innovations to come about.
Yeah, because of the exchange of perspectives and interdisciplinary nature of the whole process.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
Okay, thank you. Now let's discuss this also a bit with Wendy. I'm very curious how you would respond on that question, but perhaps you can first tell a bit about your own research and research experience with participatory research, and then we will go into dialogue, of course.
Okay. Thank you, Luce. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank the organization for the invite to this meeting. I work at the Health Innovation and Research Center. And as mentioned, my name is Wendy van der Velde, and I have founded the Patient Advisory Board for Scientific Research. We are the first Patient Advisory Board for Scientific Research in Belgium. The problem with clinical trials is that they are mostly not patient-friendly and that they fail because they are not customized to the needs of the patients. With PABO, we want to involve patients actively in the design and the development of clinical trials. We also want to encourage patient-friendly research. That way, studies are more relevant, more likely to be funded, also more likely to recruit participants. Studies are also more acceptable and feasible for the patients because they have a better patient experience. There are also less dropouts. The societal impact is indeed the patient voice is heard. They feel that they can contribute to better solutions for themselves and to other patients. We can do that with PAO. We review study protocols from researchers and also funding applications. And that way they have more funding opportunities because the patient is involved. But with PAO, we also help to make more complex documents make more comprehensible, such as informed consent form and other patient material. We can help design cartoons or videos instead of all those complex documents that are also too large to expand it. The patients can also, with PAO, bring new ideas for new research. So the researchers have more innovations in their research. In the future, we started more than 1 year ago with 14 members. In the meanwhile, we have 24 members. So we are growing, but we want to grow big. The examples, the most important examples for us are the UK and the Netherlands. Participation in scientific research is very well developed there. In the future, we want to work with focus groups per condition. We also want to get more diversity to present the patient as much as possible. But what do we need to grow big? We want that the researchers submit their protocols with us. It's easier for them. They don't have to look for patients. They can contact PABO, and that way we can also optimize our progress. So the more protocols we receive, the more we learn, and the more we can help the research and the patients. For an example, we have developed guidelines for the researcher to make research more patient-friendly. We have also developed a step-by-step plan. You can see there was the benefits and also you see tricks for the researchers for making research more patient-friendly. And last but not least, you can increase, such as I mentioned, the funding opportunities. When you want more information, you can find it on our website. You can see there the guidelines and the step-by-step plan, and also the flyer you can see for our patients. I would suggest take a look. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for explaining a bit the working of the Institute of PAO. I have actually a question related to the research design and research process, and I was wondering when you think the participation of patients in your case start in the research project, and when does it end? Are they involved in developing the research questions, and even do you couple back with them when the research has finished, or how do you see that? Is it when do they give their input, or are they asked to give the input?
We prefer that the researcher comes to us at the beginning of the study. The earlier the better. So they have then more chance to that their research will succeed. So we suggest, we recommend that they come to us at the beginning. During the study is also good. Then we can make PAO. PAO can make adjustments to their protocol, and we also recommend that they couple back to us the results. We can also give tips that they do that on a symposium, by newsletter, and so on.
Okay, thank you. And actually, it's also you're a bit in the same domain, we could say, the medical one. So, Tineke, I would also like to ask you something. What do you think participatory research actually implies in terms of institutional change? Is there institutional change needed for it to work? For instance, we could say that there is a kind of fixed protocol, but in order to start changing it, which kind of change do we need?
Thank you for the question. I'm actually involved in a similar process in the Leiden University Medical Center, where under the banner of value-based healthcare, also a patient advisory committee, a PAC, was introduced. And this PAC fitted nicely in the institution, because then you have a committee with patients who will assess protocols and will give their feedback on that. And I started a discussion with one of my colleagues, a professor, and also the family members and patients, and we have also doctors and nurses with experiential knowledge in our group, whether we would like to function as a PAC. And we had a big discussion about, what does it mean if we are a PAC? We are becoming institutionalized and doing involvement, but are we following the topics that are important for the people in the PAC and patients? So we still have the banner PAC, but we are doing other things. We are investigating what are the issues that are important for patients and for family members. And also, who should be in the room and who do we miss? And there's also a sort of ebb and flow who are in the group. There was a father of a daughter who was 9 years old, and she was admitted to the child care department, but she died. And he said, I'm no longer willing to participate in this group because I'm no longer in the hospital. And then the other group members asked him, but your experiences are still very important. So are you willing to sometimes tell your story about the child care department, which he felt was very successful in working with the parents? So we are trying to rework the institutional setting here.
Yes, which is very interesting but also difficult kind of thing, I can imagine. But to tie in a little bit with your remark, who is in the room and who is not, I was actually wondering, Wendy, are there patients which are much more difficult to reach? And do you keep track of the disparities that sometimes exist over there?
Yes, by recruiting members for our patient advisory board, we attracted always the same people, mostly people who are has a high education, people from patient organizations, people who has who are very interested in scientific research, and maybe strange, but mainly women. And not as many young people as we want. And also people who are less involved, or people with another cultural background, religious backgrounds, and people with limited health literacy.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's actually interesting to know. I also noticed a quite noticeable gender imbalance here in the room. So yeah, we could actually wonder what is actually the cause of that. But it's actually a good point, perhaps, this different levels of participation equality to go to the next section of this panel and to look at the next question also. I don't know if this will be working, but someone is already monitoring it. So the next question was actually, does participatory research lead to empowerment of the participants? And I'm curious to see the responses. It's almost the same as the last one. I hope it's not a copy as the first question. So only one said no, but the majority, 50 votes, are saying yes, it does lead to empowerment. Is there someone in the room who would like to say something on that question?
Hello, I can explain my no.
Yes, that's very interesting. Yes.
My no was what happens after the research. That's why I said no.
Yeah.
So many of the projects I was involved in, and I know colleagues of UGent are involved in, end after the project. And sometimes I've met people whom I was very involved in, a few years later, and it appeared even more negative. Their career. So most of my work was with the stakeholders in the city. I live here, I work here, students, young women and men said, well, I learned how it could be, but it isn't. So that's why I said no.
Yes, thank you for this input. So it can also be a bit disappointing when the research ends, the empowerment comes also to an end. Yes. Thank you for this input. Bastiaan, actually, your research is also touching upon this issue of participation inequality. So I would like to invite you to tell us a bit more about your research first, and then we will
dive into the question.
Go to the conversation, yes.
So as you mentioned in your introduction, I'm part of research group MICT, and we have always been like the linking point between technology development and user and society. So we're trying to translate what technology can do towards what society needs. My specific expertise there is focused on the relationship between technology and the city and what the people in the city want of that technology, what is often called smart city research. And basic starting point there is that technology in the city is often pushed from a very technological perspective. There's very little attention for what people need, and especially very little attention for what I call shadow publics in the city need. People that are not involved in traditional innovation processes, that are not involved in participatory design, and so on. So I've done research on those participation inequalities to map them. The obvious conclusion there was that there's some kind of participation Matthew effect, that those who participate get even more empowered through these new tools we provide them. And that it's very tough to reach these shadow publics, not per se because they don't have the right skills, not because we don't reach them through our communication channels, but because they often lack motivation, they don't see the point of it. So it's really hard to get into their life and make them understand why they should care about these topics and why they should be involved in these things. So a couple of, I don't know if there's some images there, a couple of projects that illustrate how this translates into reality. We, for example, did a study on looking for technology to kind of battle social isolation among elderly citizens, experimenting with all kinds of smart voice interfaces, how we could make volunteers come by with senior citizens who needed the contact the most. And now we're looking for how new technological interfaces can feed cultural heritage into neighborhoods to increase social cohesion and promote communication across different cultures in the different neighborhoods of our city. So this is more or less what we do, and we try to look for those populations that are overlooked. But it's a tough challenge. I'm sure you all recognize this challenge. So this is definitely something we can discuss because that's something I'm really interested in.
Thank you, Bas. I'm a bit concerned, Tineke. I'm looking at your chair and it's standing really on the very edge of the platform. So I just wanted to say that first. Okay. So, but Bas, from your research, what do you think are possible ways to tackle these disparities in reaching out to participants?
As Tineke called it, you have to become part of the tribe. I really like that metaphor. But what is very challenging is that in my context is that you often have to join multiple tribes. It's not just senior citizens, it's also working with students, it's working with people from the city, it's talking with different also private healthcare initiatives. So you need actually key informants or ways into that different cultural context. And you also need to provide the right incentives to provide this safe space. And it might be different for each context. For example, if you work with different actors within the city department, they need mandates from their superiors to be able to participate. If you work with, for example, HR departments of big tech companies, you probably need some money incentives to allow them to have this free time. So this is often, it's a combination of finding a right way to become part of their culture, but also understanding what that cultural context needs to provide the necessary space to actually pull them out of that context and create a new environmental or experimental window in which they can co-experiment, co-learn without being constrained by the boundary conditions of that specific context they're used to be part of.
Yes. So if I understand it well, you're arguing here to move a little bit beyond the target group research formats. But I was also wondering if it's different forms and levels of participation are always so problematic. Perhaps it can also be valuable and be part of the process and analysis of a research project.
One thing is there that you have depth versus reach, I think. In terms of reach, you have all these new possibilities using crowdsourcing, online voting system, and so on, to have this more superficial but broad participation, which is, if you would describe it in terms of agency ladder or something like that, would be very low. But on the other hand, you need a smaller group of people that you can work together with and take or make part of a process that lets them grow over time and also learn to grow towards each other. For example, if you work with senior citizens, it's interesting to go in depth with a select set of people and also make them understand the perspective of students, also make them understand the perspective of civil servants. And that's a process that takes time, and that level of depth of agency is only possible for a small set of people, which always has the risk of becoming very anecdotal and not being generalizable or not involving sufficient people. So I think in a participatory research program, you need to consider depth versus reach in a smart way and also allowing lower levels of participation and also perceiving that as valuable.
Okay, and then perhaps to come back to the notion of empowerment, what does it actually mean for you in participatory research? And also perhaps linked to that, what is actually needed if we want to empower people that are marginalized in multiple and also intersecting ways?
It's also a tough question. I think I want to touch upon two dimensions of that. The first is, I think, the interesting question of deciding which target population you will work with. For example, we have this patient platform that was mentioned earlier, but who decides whether we will focus on senior citizens who are lonely or problematic alcohol use in social high-rise buildings, or who will make that decision? Is it possible for patients, for example, or citizens to make that decision? Or do we need other kinds of expertise to orient us in this definition of target populations and related problems? Then a second question is, I kind of follow Marie-Claire's remark that often we try to have impact. We can try to rationalize that impact we have, for example, like Tineke did with her link with collective action, and then probably something will change on the long term. But most of the times our research context is being limited by the resources we have. We have 2 years to do something, and then it ends. Although we want to have this post-care with the people we involved and we want to keep this community alive, it's really hard because we don't have the operational support to do this in a structural way. So it's a tough question. Most of the time what we do, the insights we deliver are being delivered, but then nothing happens with that.
It's a bit
So
related
I
to
would
that,
pretend it to also be one of the limited people who are skeptical towards that. But on the other hand, if we create an environment, and that's more like a meta-analysis of the issue or the problem, if we provide an environment in which several experiments can take place and we can learn together as a society from the perspective of the city, as academics, as citizens, I believe that this set of micro-experiments can fuel long-term urban transition processes through an increased knowledge on what kind of technologies, what kind of solutions we need as society. It's a bit meta, but I think the true value is there. By exploring and experimenting together, we will come to better decisions, better policy on the long run.
Yes, so that links also a bit to the process of knowledge production and perhaps also to what Tineke has been saying. And Tineke, I was actually wondering if there is actually a link between knowledge production and the different levels of participation and the degrees of empowerment throughout the process. It's a difficult question, I know, but just to, perhaps you have reflected about it already.
I think that participatory research becomes interesting if we enter a state of messiness, if we are challenging well-rehearsed notions through a confrontation between different perspectives. I also see the researcher as a Socratic guide who is asking difficult questions about taken for granted, like the taken for granted notion of participation. So going beyond those well-rehearsed notions is a way to innovation.
Yes.
And it is indeed an intensive process for people to become critical and to ask critical questions. And people need mutual dialogue and deliberation in order to come to new questions. I've worked with so many patients groups, and if you just give them a survey, which is superficial, they will just repeat what researchers think is important for their lives, fundamental research. But if you work with them, they will notice they have those problems right now and answers right now where they want to put more emphasis on, but they need the deliberation in order to come to those new notions.
Yeah. So it's very much about opening the space, the safe space that you were talking about, for people to share their ideas and their knowledge, actually, I think.
And have the difference in the room also, because if you have too much an enclave, you will have you run the risk of a repetition of understandings. That's what I find so interesting in my patient advisory council right now, that we have doctors who have been ill, who are telling their stories to patients, and immediately you get a process of mutual understanding and interest in, oh, this is not just a doctor, the image I have of a doctor, this is also a vulnerable person.
So it's also a way to challenge your own normative points of view within the research setting, I think.
And that's, I think, why it's also so important or interesting to work with these edge cases, with these, even within patient populations, the edge cases or the shadow publics, or the ones who we don't reach, are actually the ones challenging these often implicit assumptions the most. So also looking for diversity within target populations really helps forwards the valid knowledge production.
So I think that links very well with the next question, which is of course also related to the positionality of the researcher, but also of everyone involved in the research process. And that question was, is participatory research more activist than other forms of research? And I'm looking here to the results. I think there was more differentiation for the first time. So I see 10 votes for no, and 41 voted yes. Looking again to you, is there someone who would like to elaborate on her or his vote? Why have you voted no? I don't think it's actually more activists. Someone? No? Well, I think that Tessa perhaps has something to say about that. I'm very curious to see what your take is actually on this issue and how you see it. And we will actually, I hope we will literally see it, because you're working with participant video. But first, please explain a bit about your research experience.
Okay, thank you, Luz. I would like to add my perspective on participatory research today as an historian on the one hand, so I'm an historian by background, and as an activist at the same time. So basically as a researcher turned into a strategic ally for a local community. So over the past 6 years, I've been conducting ethnographic fieldwork in a post-conflict Guatemala, where as a Belgian historian, I have been recruited by a community of former refugees who, as we speak, are defending their territory against the construction of a hydroelectric dam. And so this community basically mobilized me. So you like the word mobilization, here it is. So the community mobilized me to make their shared history, their community history, by co-producing a documentary about their past and present struggle. So how violence from the past gets intertwined with violence from the present. And making shared history, literally in Spanish, hacer historia, action research, making history. So that's where it all comes in. Now, people from this community, they collectively identify as returnees. They originally come from different Guatemalan departments, and during the internal armed conflict in the early 1980s, they fled to Mexico, where they stayed in UN refugee camps for more than 10 years. Now, during the peace negotiations in the early 1990s, they collectively returned to Guatemala to found a new multi-ethnic return community. And so since the foundation of their community, the returnees have been obsessed with history. Who are we? Where do we come from? And where are we going as a group, as a collective, really? And so the possible construction of this hydroelectric dam basically opened up a community space to renegotiate historical narratives and to denounce this dam as a form of historical injustice, and thus to make land claims based upon this collective returnee identity. And so with my research, I could actually tap into this already ongoing community process. In 2015, during fieldwork, local authorities invited me to the community when they heard that an historian was roaming around the region. And so during our first community council, they clarified in front of the community, but especially in front of me, that they already started this work some time ago and that I would come to help to make the history of their community, the shared history, which is not self-evident because, as I repeat, multi-ethnic community, people coming from different places, different experiential backgrounds. So this was quite a challenge this community was struggling with itself. And so they insisted that if I wanted to do any interviews, I should record them and then turn everything into a documentary about their past and present struggle. And it was also explicitly mentioned that they wanted to use the documentary as a political tool in their fight against the dam. So in this case, participatory video did not mean giving cameras to the people, as with photo voice, for example. The camera was given to me. What this means in terms of agency, we can have a lot of discussions about that. But anyway, I had no filmmaking experience whatsoever at this point, but I saw this film as an opportunity to get access to the community, but also as an opportunity to give something back to the people I work with. So in terms of reciprocity, let's say. But from being a side project initially and really a matter of research ethics, filmmaking with the returnees would unexpectedly turn into a participatory research methodology. As we started filming, according to some sort of script that was negotiated on a community level and in which I also took an active part, a very specific kind of knowledge slightly came to the surface through this process of making the film. Participatory filmmaking for me in the end turned into a way to study how communities collectively produce and mobilize historical narratives. So making history with the returnees basically gave me insight into what I, in my PhD later on, have called collective narrative capacity. So my entire research design and agenda basically evolved or emerged from this specific research setting and challenges that the community itself was dealing with, how to make a shared history. Now, the point I would like to make, and then I will conclude, is that I believe we should actually move beyond this eternal binary or opposition between research on the one hand and activism on the other hand. Participating into an ongoing community project myself, while at the same time allowing for this community to actively participate in my research, and this shaped the entire research design, has not only been an ethical choice, it has also resulted in the co-production of a very specific kind of shared knowledge that otherwise I would not have been able to grasp or get access to. Knowledge about collective narrative production and mobilization, and thus this question about how do you make shared history, a question that was raised by the returnees themselves. So I would basically like to fuse ethical and epistemological arguments to plea for participatory research.
Thank you very much. It's also linked to what you have been saying about the normative horizon and so forth. But I hope we can see a couple of minutes actually of the video that Tessa co-produced.
Somos refugiados, sobrevivientes del conflicto armado y retornados a la vez porque estamos de nuevo en nuestras tierras, ¿verdad? Estos son huesos que encontraron ya de la gente encontrada anteriormente. Aquí están escarbando nuevamente, escarbando otras cosas. Hay huesos que los que vimos allá.
Ay, sí. Es triste recordar. Y una chica me dijo, no, se puede sacar, me dijo, se puede culminar. Yo me dijo, vete en el río, vas a agarrar el agua, lo vas a subir en la cabeza, vas a lavar tu cara y así se va a ir borrando. Es difícil que se me quite y nunca me va a quitar eso en la cabeza.
Las más de 900 víctimas murieron en distintos lugares de esta región, murieron los hermanos que dieron su vida por la tierra. Nuestras tierras, nuestras comunidades están siendo amenazadas otra vez. Nos hicieron una guerra con armas. Ahora nos hacen una guerra desalojándonos, privatizando nuestros ríos, privatizando otra vez las tierras.
Estamos aquí en estas tierras que nos dieron como reemplazo de las tierras que se nos habían quitado.
Y estamos tratando de conservarla para la nueva generación que viene. La lucha sigue, de una u otra manera, sigue la lucha.
It's actually not coming soon, but it's already out now. Oh, it wants to restart even. It's already out and people can see it on the internet, or? Yeah. Oh, perhaps, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, so okay. Yeah, it was released actually by the end of 2020, so pretty recently. It was also released together with the community, in fact. So yeah, it's out there, it's online, it's freely available. And maybe to maybe contextualize, because this is a very professional end product. At a certain point, we ended up by we reached the limitations. Wow.
I hope it will be better now. No, not yet.
Not really.
We are streaming ourselves in multiple ways.
Okay. No, it's not.
Perhaps we can try. Yes, I think we are there.
Okay. So actually, at a certain point, I made a switch from participatory and ethnographic experimental filmmaking to more collaborative and professional filmmaking, because the participatory process actually showed its limits at a certain point to arrive to an action-oriented product, effective cinema that was desired by the returnees themselves. And so we decided, together with the community, to involve an external professional Western filmmaker that actually was mandated by the community to co-create this movie together with us. So is this a form of tokenism? I would say no, but we can debate about this.
Is there someone who would like to react on this question? Because otherwise I have a question like, when you are doing this research, how do you actually mitigate between the different roles you take up as a researcher, activist? You, of course, want to move beyond these binaries, but I can imagine that you sometimes have to deal with the expectations that come from the institution that put you in this very strict box of researcher. So sometimes there perhaps exist tensions between the aims that you have that are more transformative. How do you mitigate between these different roles you take up in such a project?
And the aims that institutions or funders
have of research projects.
Well, first of all, I think if it comes to finding funding, then Tineke already pointed out the fact that we have to present already pre-designed research projects and outlines from the beginning to get funding, while the idea, of course, of participatory action research is to let meaningful research practices emerge really from the concrete setting. So there is already one problem, I would say. But then on the other hand, I do believe that funding agencies are getting more and more sensitive to social change as being part of a research trajectory. This film was funded also by the Global Minds program, for example, of the UGent. So there are things moving, I would say.
Were you limited by that, or were you able to do what you want to do?
I have been able to do what I wanted. Yeah.
You also see that funding agencies are changing and be more in being more open towards this new types of research?
In the Netherlands, some funding agencies are opening up, and that's a very delicate process. But they are, moving up. And I want to add to what you said about expectations of funding agencies, of researchers. People who you work with also have very strict and limited ideas about being a researcher. So you always have to negotiate and talk about how you see your role as a researcher, that you're not going to control them or measure them, or so it's not only the funding agency.
Yes, of course. Because you defined your role as a strategic ally, which is very interesting. That's a facilitator of something that's already there, or how would you?
I think I have played two different roles. I was explicitly solicited for my expertise as an historian.
Yes.
So their collective history, let's say, it was already there. They were already trying to collectivize this narrative. It was in bits and pieces, and literally they wanted me to unify something that was scattered.
Yeah.
So that's where my experience in collective memory comes in. But on the other hand, I was also solicited as a Belgian historian with resources, with networks, and with a certain legitimacy also to co-create this history that in a country like Guatemala is officially denied. So they needed also this institutional authority from my part in that sense. And if I may add something to this institutional perspective also, so if we engage in participatory research, what comes out of it, maybe movies like this, how are they valorized in a broader academic trajectory? Not so much yet. Things are changing. It's not only A1 publications anymore, but
could this documentary be your PhD?
It is, actually.
It is.
It's part of it. It's part of the PhD. But it's not an A1 publication.
It still has to be accompanied by ranked publications.
Exactly, but now I'm talking from my perspective and not from the perspective of the community, of course.
Of course.
My
but
role
that's
as a researcher.
the institutional expectations, yes. But I can imagine that this that you want to move beyond the binaries of academia versus activism also because you think it's a way to tackle the epistemic injustices in the research process. Perhaps you could also tell us a bit more about this.
Well, maybe to really link this idea of knowledge production and activism again, and then maybe specifically participatory research and activism, I would really say that through participatory research, you actually create a kind of shared but also lived knowledge that can be very useful for collective subjectivities. Collective subjectivities, groups, communities that are in some kind of a struggle, a resistance movement, social political struggle.
Yeah.
So this is a type of knowledge that's quite useful to be mobilized directly to them, because this type of struggle usually does not have an individualized subject. So this is where knowledge production really comes in with the activist part. And then, of course, epistemic justice. There is no social justice without epistemic justice in a context like Guatemala, for example.
Yes, exactly. Bas, do you also see this concept of lived knowledge back in your research?
Yes, I think that's a bit related to what I said earlier with the experimental windows and co-learning and experiencing change together and more resilient, change in future or something. But the thing that I'm sometimes a bit struggling with, I think in your case, the ethical and democratic goal is clear, but isn't there also a danger in being instrumentalized as a researcher if the goal from a community is maybe less ethical? For example, being instrumentalized, asked by some kind of community, like an anti-vax community or whatever, wanting to use the academic credibility in maybe more problematic ways.
Yeah, it's a very topical issue. Perhaps, Tineke, you have had some requests in that.
Well, perhaps that ties up to the Mentimeter, where people were saying, not only participatory researchers are activists, but researchers themselves are often activists, but they are presenting themselves as being value neutral. But values are, of course, playing a role in everything we do, in the choice of the topic, in how we approach it. So values always play a role. But we put up a mask of being
it's a facade.
A facade of being neutral. And you need your normative horizon in order to, and your moral compass to find out to whom you want to be an ally. That there is no textbook which will tell you. So you need your moral you need your moral values in order to deal with that.
And being aware also of that you take up this position, I think. But I think it can also be very different if you are called into the process than are trying to kind of involve participants in something that started with you in on your research desk. So that's probably a completely different experience if you're called in.
Definitely, and this, especially for historians, the risk of getting instrumentalized is quite a debate. But here, the context, as you say, is also very important. I am not contributing to some sort of state-sponsored history here. I am actually being an ally of a marginalized group that has no place in official history, and so not responding to this call is an equally ethical choice.
Yes. So not tackling certain research questions and not...
It's a responsibility.
It's also,
almost,
of course, a choice, you could say.
I find it very interesting that you also work with a filmmaker, an artist. Can you tell us why you started to collaborate with such a person?
This is because we started making this film. I had no filmmaking experience, but I am quite visual. So the pictures you see there are what I try to do. And then we had like several feedback rounds, collective montage sessions, etc. And in the end, they decided it was boring. So this was a moment in which it was like, yeah, but it's a lot of talking heads. It also visually did not represent what they were doing. They are farmers, they do this, they do that. And so, and this was not the expected political tool outcome. So then it was decided collectively to involve this filmmaker, and I took responsibility for doing it because I raised certain expectations also from the beginning of the process. So I looked for additional funding.
Okay. Yeah. So that's also because there was a co-ownership that you actually had to take this step because you started the trajectory and you couldn't leave it there, probably. I'm going to look if there are some questions from the audience, because I think it's already 12 o'clock or later, and I can imagine that after all this intellectual food, you're also into real foods. Yeah, I feel that this is the end of the debate.
I thank you very much to you for being the moderator. Thank you also to all panelists for your interesting contributions. I would also like to take a moment to thank the online audience who has been joining us up to now. And from now on, we continue with the live audience here. So thank you to the people for joining online. I will go on with some practical information about lunch. So if everybody just stays for a while where she is for 2 more minutes, I will explain. Luz, could you change to the next slide? Yeah.